Thank you so much for watching my show, William Wallace for America. Of course, you always hear me repeat this, but I'm also on all podcast apps. So if you would rather listen to the show, you turn that video off right now. Actually, no, you're going to want to watch this video because I'm going to have some banners running at the bottom that you're going to want to know about and some links. But this information in this interview is something that I'm really excited to bring to you for many reasons. One, I've been hearing about squatter rights for a long time. And I always think, why do squatters even have rights? Then again, in America, we're finding a lot of rights that people have that we scratch our heads and we wonder about. We're always like, for instance, we just heard that in New York, they negotiated an agreement with one of the 9/11 terrorists and for his rights. And I'm like, wait a minute, why are we giving people so many rights on their when it has the auspices, I'll say, of illegal actions? Even moreover, I think it is eroding individuals' freedoms in America. It's trampling all over our Constitution. But the best way to protect our Constitution and American values is to start in our own communities, which is another great reason to watch and listen to this interview, because this is happening in your own communities all across America. Squatters are realizing that they have the rights to do this. This interview will give you all not only information that you're going to want to hear, need to know, but it will also tell you how to defend your private property rights. With me today to talk about this is George McCleary. George, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
What's up, William? Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, when I saw you and got your information, I said, this is something we all need to know. I've already said that I know, but I don't think it can be said enough. My first question for you is, how did you get so involved in this? Let's give us a little bit of your background so you could kind of, let everybody know that you're not only skin in the game, so to speak, but your bona fides.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, let me say thanks so much for having me on the show, William. It's a real pleasure to be here and speak to your listeners, because I think they think like I think. They think like you think. And if we're going to preserve our freedom and preserve our rights as property owners, then we need to have information like what I'm going to be talking about on the show. So thanks for giving me a platform here. So I am a 20-year real estate veteran. I've been a landlord, a property developer. I've built luxury homes, apartments, and I've owned rental property across the nation, several states. And a lot of the property that I own is in Portland, Oregon, where I currently reside. It's a wonderful city, but it is a liberal city. And so there's the benefits of property ownership anywhere that it can be. But one downfall that we have around here is being in a very liberal jurisdiction that gives way too many rights to squatters. And so what I did is, this is last February, it was actually Super Bowl Sunday. I made a video called I Stole a House. And what the video is, it's a satirical reenactment of what squatters do to occupy and squat in properties in Portland or anywhere for that matter. And so I pretended to be a squatter, said, here's what they do. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to fake a lease. I'm going to break into this place. I'm going to move my stuff in, my buddies. And as soon as the police show up, we've got a he said, she said situation. And I'm just going to say, this is my place. And as we all know, 90% of the law is possession. And so cop's going to say, hey, sorry, looks like we got a he said, she said here. So sorry, I can't kick this guy out. So then the owner takes me to court. And this is all fictitious, but this is how it plays out. And so with my fake lease and my free lawyer, I get
now when you say fictitious, when you say fictitious, did you really do this, or are you just kind of created the scenario?
I created the scenario as a satire. And so at the end of it, I mean, there's several clues along the way that I'm a real estate investor. I'm not actually perpetrating this crime, but not the least of which is I say, oh yeah, and I completely trash the place because I do a ton of drugs and the place really just looks like a real drug den. And so,
did you take actual stories to accumulate to make your one story, to make your fictitious story? Did you did you take like other real stories that, because being a real estate investor, you're probably having all these scenarios shared to you. So did you like collect stories from other people and just kind of combine them into your fictitious story?
Exactly, William. I basically had heard about several instances of squatting from my colleagues and people on the internet because I interact with other real estate investors nationwide, and they're all telling me, okay, this is the most insidious squatting scam that you can do. You're faking a lease, you're moving in, and you're turning it into a civil matter rather than a criminal matter. And that's really what the essence of squatting is you're basically a trespasser that's turning into a tenant and gaining rights as a tenant when you really shouldn't. And so I basically assembled all like the playbook from these other stories, and that's how I arrived at the video. And it really blew up because most people got the joke. Most people realized, like, okay, let's go to this guy's profile. He's a real estate investor. He didn't really do this. Like, give me a break. But there was a percentage of people that said, I'm going to find this guy and I'm going to bring my guns and we'll see what happens then. I'm like, bro, look at my profile. Like,
So where I interrupted you was, when the land, when in your fictitious story where the landlord, was taking you to court, and I think you had more to tell me from there. You want to continue with that story?
yeah. So, but the way that the scam goes is after they've occupied it and the owner calls up their lawyer, the lawyer says, well, hey, we got to either get this guy out through eviction or ejectment. And eviction, the vast majority of the time, that's the civil process by which you remove a tenant that you want to get rid of. Either they're not paying, their dogs bit somebody, they, whatever reason you have for getting rid of a tenant, you can usually do that. And there's varying laws, but every single state has landlord-tenant law. But what it does is it puts it on the civil side of the law rather than the criminal. Even though this person's committing a crime, it's a tacit omission saying like, okay, well, this person has rights, so we're going to try and kick them out as a person that has rights to be there in the first place, when that's completely ass backwards on this. What it really should be is storming into the house and getting rid of the guy, but you can't do that because you might be held liable. There's stories that I've heard about people like pouring snakes down the chimney, kicking in the door, like putting bear traps up too. And then there's people that have killed their squatters, gone in guns blazing, just blown their heads off. So this has been dealt with, these squatter situations, countless ways. And what happened after my video went viral is I just became a lightning rod for all of these stories. They all came in, all like the comments and DMs I got. There were just literally hundreds of them because it was viewed tens of millions of times across all the platforms. So some people were messages me saying like, hey, you're a piece of crap, I'm going to mess you up. Then other people said like, okay, I realize this is satire. You won't believe what happened to my grandma. And then they'll tell me the story. And so I tracked a lot of these people down. I got the full stories, and it was harrowing. It was crazy what happened to all these people.
So you ought to combine all these stories into one book. I mean, this would be an amazing thing just to let other people know. So how is it that
I'm actually doing that, William? I'm glad you mentioned that. I do have a book that's coming out.
Well, when you get that book out, you're going to come out back on the podcast. We'll tell all of those stories. But right now, we're hearing all over America where squatters are basically getting people's homes, and they're able to not only live there for free, but some squatters are actually getting people's homes as a result. Have you heard those stories before? Is that just a back up to another question to follow up? Is that a yes or no?
Yeah, for sure. So what's happening? There's two types of squatting that you can talk about in context of stealing houses. Well, I stole a house was about stealing a house through basically like pretending that you're the tenant, and so you're not stealing the house per se in terms of like taking the title and now you suddenly have a $500,000 asset. It's not like that. But you are stealing occupation of the house. But there is a form of the scam and fraud that's being perpetrated where you actually steal the title of the house, and that is deed fraud. And what that is essentially the criminal takes a fraudulent deed. It's really easy to fake, or a lot of times you don't even have to fake it. You just find a notary, get a fake ID, and you take the owner's house and you put it into your name. The county recorder, as long as it's signed and notarized and has a legal description, they got to record it. And the safeguards that are in place for property deeds are absolutely laughable. It's like it everywhere else in the country. And after the title has been stolen, these people can either move in if they're really dumb, because that's just putting themselves in the crosshairs. But until the owner gets a quiet title action lawsuit and an action to quiet title, then the title remains in that person's name. And so if it's a real name, they'll move in and say, hey, look at me, I'm on the deed. Eventually, these people have been arrested and they do go to jail for fraud, but fraud cases are very difficult to prosecute and investigate. And what happens more often is they buy it with a fake name and a fake ID, and then they resell it to somebody else. And so what Title Fraud Defender does is it heads them off at the pass and says, all right, hey, William, somebody's transferred your title and want to make sure you knew about it and that you meant to do this. And if chances are you didn't, you're going to say, oh my gosh. And you're able to head them off at the pass and make sure that the property is not resold and that no loans are taken out against the property, because that's where you lose the hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity that you work so hard to build up over the years.
So I understand that the title fraud is kind of a different thing than the squatters' rights, but I have
That's right.
heard stories of where the squatters have actually been able to get the house in their name or be able to acquire the home via squatters' rights. Are those stories common, or is that kind of like the less common story that the squatters actually get the house? But we hear about those more because it's sounds horrible that a squatter got the house for themselves. But are most of the stories, what I'm getting to, are most of the stories the squatters are just getting to live there for free for a long time and then eventually kicked out because they've got rights to squat, and they kind of get that through the different various loopholes? Or is it that if they stay there long enough and they win, they actually do get the house? What would that be?
Yeah, so what we're normally talking about, like, 90 some percent of the time is just stealing tenancy, which is stealing like possession of the house. But what you're talking about, where they actually steal the house by way of actually getting legitimately on title, that's adverse possession, and that's known colloquially as squatters' rights. So when we talk about squatters' rights, we're kind of talking about two separate things, because
Yeah,
squatters'
tenant
rights.
squatters and eternal squatters. No.
Eternal squatters, yeah. So adverse possession laws are what we're talking about in a very small case of squatters' rights issues, but nonetheless, it is a law in I think every single state that you can, if you're openly and notoriously occupying a property, then you can be named the rightful owner if you're there long enough. And normally that's a really long time, like 10 years, but sometimes it's less and it varies state by state. But if you manage to go undetected, living openly and notoriously, waving to your neighbors, mowing your lawn, then yes, you can be named the rightful owner of that property. It's just not as common to have a property, at least one that's worth really anything, that isn't monitored at all over the period of time that it takes to establish adverse possession of the place. So it
So,
does happen, but it's pretty rare.
sounds like in that case, a squatter takes a house that has been forgotten about, and to live there, they're probably fixing it up somewhat livable. And the neighbors are probably, hey, oh look, that's a squatter, but man, that house has never looked so good. That squatter's cutting the grass, he's waving to me,
Yeah, yeah, and
let
they'll
him
do
have
that.
the house. you know.
Yeah. In some cases that maybe they could be of net benefit to the neighborhood. You never know. But most of the time, these are
Right.
criminals. They're stealing. They're
They're
up to
doing
no good.
drugs. It's a drug house. It's a crack house. It's a, brothel or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, there was a stripper pole in. There's a friend of mine who had some squatters, and she got them out eventually. But it's that's actually one of the stories I talk about in my book. Um, but yeah, it's when they moved her out, the place was completely covered with animal feces and was completely trashed. But they left behind a DJ booth and a stripper pole. There was a stripper pole in the living room.
That's not the kind of strip place I'd ever go to.
No, I'm
If it's that
no.
bad with their animal feces, what are they running there? It's
Maybe it was for practice. I really I shudder to think.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But and the reason I went there a little bit is to show that this is that not only is this happening in America, not only do you have the stories that back it up, and not only are we hearing a lot more about it, but it just goes to show you the lack of respect that people have. I mean, I go back, everybody wants to, some people want to complain about, well, if we went back to the the 30s and 40s and 50s when America was that homey, picket white fence 60s, 70s kind of era. We don't want to go back to those. Like some people say, we don't want to go back to those days. That's so, back in the day kind of thing. But when you look at those days, this would never happen in those days. People had respect for others. They had respect for other people's properties. Call it Leave It to Beaver, but the reality is, we don't have to live in the Leave It to Beaver days to be able to still respect other people's
There's
property.
Yeah, there's a lot of things from that era that we could really take some hard lessons from, some really good lessons. Number one, with regards to this issue, is knowing your local police officer, knowing who's patrolling, knowing your neighbors, because these are the two people that are going to say, "Hey, hang on a second, no, somebody's over there in William's house. That doesn't seem right. That guy doesn't look like the type of guy he would rent to. I'm going to give him a call." But America, in a lot of ways, has lost its front porch. People are not as close as they are with their neighbors as they used to be because they're inside on their devices. And that has become more of a community in a lot of ways, in a lot of cases, than your actual community where you live. And so, yeah, I think that you could take a good hard look at about how people were very closely knit with their communities and could prevent this very thing. And if the squatter's in there and you got a he said, she said with the local police officer who knows the owner, knows the neighbors, then they're going to say, all right, you're clearly committing a crime. I'm going to kick your butt out of here. And problem solved. But you just don't have that quite so much these days, William. So I think you're right about that.
But let's talk about the attacks on freedom. Because not only does this lack of respect for people for property rights affect the individual that owns the property, it's invasive. It's not only it's invasive and it's pervasive. If there's two little paired up words there to explain that, not only is it invasive for that property and that owner, but it's pervasive in the way that it's going to spread. And
Yeah.
if it spreads, if this becomes more accepted, where landlords are like, oh yeah, this is my fifth or sixth squatter, and they're talking for, oh yeah, I get them every so often or whatever, and it becomes more of a nonchalant accepted thing, and squatters start getting away with it more, then more and more people are going to have their properties stolen temporarily. And then not to mention that they destroy the property, like we pointed out just now. And so it decreases property value. It might affect that individual that has that, but it's also going to affect everybody's property in the neighborhood. And then as this spreads and becomes more of the norm, in America, when property rights are watered down, individual freedoms are lost, our personal right to prosperity is affected. All of these things are affected with the squatters' rights. So what do you kind of gone into this, and you kind of are sharing I guess spreading the word, but what else have you done to be able to help protect not only people from getting squatters' rights, but this being more, invasive in America?
Yeah. So, I mean, the consequences, just like you're saying, William, are very far reaching. It's our rights, it's our freedoms, it's our rights as property owners and as individuals to protect ourselves and our property. And so what you can do in this case is, what you should be able to do is call the authorities and have somebody removed. And the whole intention behind having the rules set up so you can't just like remove somebody from your property with a police officer is so that you don't get landlords who are bad actors who are removing people who do have a contractual right to be there. And that's understandable to a point, but the pendulum has shifted so far to protecting the tenants that the landlords are left out in the cold in situations like these. So if the laws were written in the favor of the landlord so that the property owner actually did have the right to repossess their property, if they did so unlawfully, then yes, they should be held accountable. But like I said, the pendulum has swung so far over to the left on this one that our rights are being trampled on. So how do we protect ourselves, William? It's on us. And that's the whole premise behind squatterdefender.com. That's my online course where I teach people everything there is to know about squatting. And that's squatter protection, squatter detection, and squatter ejection, because you got to know when they're there. You got to know how to get rid of them, and you got to know how to prevent it from happening. So that's why I created the course. But in the short run, how do you protect yourself? You know, all the same ways that you're protecting your home right now. You got a burglar alarm, you got a firearm, you've got cameras, you've got window coverings, dawn to dusk light bulbs. You're mowing your grass. There's no cobwebs that are people can see that that send the message like, hey, this guy's not taking care of his place. They look up online, they can see if there's debt on the place. And he's got no debt on the place. There's no payment. There's nobody coming and going. This looks like a path of least resistance. So I can like either steal the title or I can go squat here. And so to answer your question, William, once again, it is on us.
So, I mean, we've talked about what type of people are there, and we've talked about how drug users and, and different people with nefarious actions or bad actors are going in these places. But it sounds to me when you talk about people stealing a title, they move into a place or they move into a place that they see is paid for, debt free. There's no mortgage holder on the title, and they move in with the intention that they can steal place. It sounds to me like they're pretty smart people, that they kind of know what they're doing. So, when we talk about squatters, many people think it's, illegals coming from, because there was that issue where they said some illegals that were coming across the border were learning how to squat in houses and steal homes.
Oh yeah,
And
that
then
guy. Yeah.
what's that? You know that guy?
Oh yeah, he's in jail now. Actually, I made a video about that.
Yeah, exactly right. So
They tracked him down. Thank goodness.
That's awesome. So, but you're talking about drug users, talking about whatever that are moving in these houses, and some of them are moving in with the intent to try to steal the title. It sounds like now you're talking about somebody that's a little bit more educated than just a drug user. But although not to say drug users aren't smart, because some of these criminals are, while they're drug users or whatever the case may be, they're actually really smart, and it's kind of surprising. So is it just that there's so many different various degrees of this theft, of squatter theft, of lease theft, as you pointed out, that there's no one thing. It's like, where you have these instances of people moving in with the intent to get it, that know what they're doing, maybe drug users that are just looking for a place to hang for until they get kicked out, or they realize that, hey, I've got a right to stay here. Is there any one specific thing that's growing, or is it just so much of it is just growing in all those areas?
William, one of the things that I was really shocked about as I went viral, started doing research on this, started hearing all the stories, was just how much the squatters and the title thieves run the gamut specifically the squatters run the gamut from your low level, homeless drug addicts all the way up through like people with jobs that pay over like $200,000 per year. In fact, there's a guy up in Seattle. He's a serial squatter, and his game is he squats in luxury homes in Bellingham, or Bellevue rather, and they can't get rid of him because the tenant laws are insane up in King County. So he goes up there, and he just goes from one to the next, and he has a job. He drives a nice car. He's married. He's indistinguishable from the next guy on the street in terms of just his appearance and how he's set up his life. But he has no trouble rationalizing in his mind committing this crime and committing this theft because he's not ever held criminally responsible. So it's everybody from, I've in my rentals and in my construction projects, I've kicked out tons of homeless guys who just set up for the night. And I just, I walk up, poke them and say, hey, God, you got to get out of here. And, usually they, say like, oh, okay. And then they leave.
You are in Portland, where I've heard that, homelessness is just horrible. The rates of homelessness they're extreme, that when you're walking in the street in Portland, you're walking over homeless people all the time. Is that correct?
Yeah. No, they've moved from your town to my town, William. Unfortunately, they're imports because they know they have an easy time in Portland. It is changing because people like myself are really fed up about it, and not everybody in Portland is a bleeding heart liberal that thinks that people can just shoot up on the street in front of their kids and get away with it. So things are slowly changing, But you're right, and that's one reason why I've had to kick out so many homeless people from my properties. But I luckily to date have never had like a full blown squatter where I've got somebody like faking a lease and has any level of sophistication. It's just been, your homeless drug addicts just bedding down for the night. And how long were they there? Probably no more than a day. It's an active construction site. But but there's another lady in Los Angeles who is an Airbnb squatter who is asking for a cash for keys, which is just, hey, bribe me to move out, of $100,000. They eventually did get rid of her, but she was a professional, just like that other guy, a professional squatter, and a professional, like had a job, had a car, had her life together, but just saw the opportunity. And it just goes to show, William, there's a lot of people that are willing to rob a bank if they know they're not going to have to pay the price for it. They can rationalize it morally because they think it's okay to steal from a big corporation, steal from a rich property owner, whatever it is. But that's how they rationalize it. They think, okay, this is going to be the crime for me because it's low risk, high reward.
So I'm going to go backwards a minute, and then I'm ask you some fresh questions. Going
Yeah.
backwards, that guy that's the professional makes good money, and is he moving into the houses with the first month's rent basically, and then after a month or 2 months he stops paying the rent? How does he do that?
So there's a difference between a holdover tenant and a squatter. So a holdover tenant is, you got a contract with him. Maybe he was with the previous owner. Maybe you made the contract with him, but he has some right to be there as a tenant, or at least he did. And so that guy is slightly different than a traditional squatter, because the squatter has never had any right to be there in the first place. And if you've got a non-paying tenant, if you've been scammed by somebody who puts in their deposit in first month and then just doesn't pay you ever again, that's terrible. But it's not, and people do that. But that's when you're like conducting background checks and say like, oh, okay, well, looks like this guy has done this a bunch of times. He's got all these
Right,
evictions. Like, we're not going to rent to this guy. But if you're a squatter, of course, you're not getting background checks. You're just showing up. And
right.
so the guy in Seattle, yeah, as far as what I've understood, is that he's just getting into a place and squatting, and he's not a holdover tenant. And even though that's another problem, is people just signing a lease and then just not
So
paying and getting some free
he
rent.
basically breaks into the house, and then people, so one day people go there and, hey, so when'd you move in? Oh, I'm here, move me out if you have to,
Yeah, call my
or try.
lawyer. Sorry.
But he's married, you said.
Yeah, he's got a wife, and there was a new car in his driveway.
So does the wife move in with him?
Yeah, he's bringing the whole family. I don't know if he has kids or not, but
This
yeah.
is so these stories are fascinating. But let's go back to, you've talked several times. You've mentioned the word liberal ones. You've mentioned Democrats. You've mentioned some different things. Let's talk about this. This sounds to me like a Republican issue. The Republicans would want all these squatters out. The Democrats would want to keep them in because it is a way to redistribute wealth, and maybe that's why we're not getting harsher laws on the books to get rid of these squatters. Are
Mhm.
you not finding that that's the reason why we're not getting harsher laws, or is this a political thing, or is that just coincidental? Your thoughts?
So, unfortunately, it is a political thing. And generally speaking, Republicans are going to side with landlords on most things, and Democrats are going to side with tenants, generally speaking. One thing I've found is that squatting
You
is
find that
one
you
thing.
found that in the political spectrum then when you're working on this?
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure, for
Okay.
sure. Yeah,
So
no, I got liberal friends, I got conservative friends, I talk to pretty much everybody. But the one thing among property owners and investors, no matter what your politics, nobody agrees that this is right. You got to go really far down the river to the left to find people that are radical and that are radicalized enough to think, hey, I think this is great. You should absolutely squat and steal from these rich property owners. Those are the left wing wackos. Pretty much everybody on both sides of the aisle who has any shred of rationality says this is theft. We need to deal with this. This is totally wrong. And in some places, like in Florida, Governor DeSantis, he actually signed in legislation that enables you to more easily remove squatters. And so there is movement on this, but if you live in a red state, hopefully it'll come down the pike soon and you can get some help from your government. But in liberal states, don't hold your breath. It's way too weighted toward the tenant, and that's the whole squatting scam, is to be thought of as a tenant.
So basically, amongst landowners, whether they're Republican or Democrat, they want harsher laws. But anybody on the outside, let's say it's Democrat politicians or Democrat bureaucrats or people that are liberal minded, they're the ones that are have that movement that's protecting these squatter rights by saying, "Oh no, everybody's got a chance to live and have a place to live, and everybody we should be able to redistribute the wealth ourselves." It's just a way that they can go after. It's a way somebody can get a house by squatting there. Is that kind of what you're hearing, or is that kind of what you're feeling?
Yeah, it's less that, people think that, hey, I think it's great that these people squat so they can get a place to live. I mean, that you got some left-wing wackos that are thinking that somewhere, I'm sure. But it's really more that the people on the left are saying, like, all right, yeah, no, squatting's bad. And then we say, either right, left, or whoever saying, okay, we need to have measures in place to get these people out. And it looks like this. And the liberals will say, "Oh boy, but what if you kick somebody out that actually did have the right to be there, and they're willing to let 1,000 property owners lose a ton of money, be inconvenienced, have their rights compromised in order for one tenant to not be wrongfully evicted?" It's like like execute, let 1,000 men go free so that one isn't wrongfully convicted. And so what I'm saying is like, hey, yeah, if there is bad actors, like, yeah, hold them accountable. But, we need to still have some measures in place. And this should span across the aisle. We need to have measures in place to help property owners here. And
To
so
me, this
everybody
is
kind of,
go ahead. You
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
William.
No,
Yeah.
to me, this is analogous to election fraud because
It really spans the aisle.
well, but to me, this is analogous to election fraud because we know that our voter rolls are dirty. We know that there's election fraud going on, but the part of the reason why nobody wants to try to get really harsh with the laws to stop it is because they don't want to disenfranchise the legitimate voters. Like, oh no, we can't purge the rolls of the 100,000 or 50 whatever bad registrations that we have. We can't purge the rolls because there might be a few on there that are legitimate registrations that we don't want to disenfranchise their right to vote. It almost sounds to me analogous to election fraud.
Yeah, it's a similar concept. It's the concept of, let's really make absolute certain we're not kicking out any bad tenants, or we're not letting, any people that shouldn't be voting, keeping them off the polls. But it's not a great way to operate. You need to find some middle ground so that, you're taking care of both sides of the population, not just the left.
So let's talk about this. What are some? I know that you teach classes on how to protect people's property and protect their from getting I guess squatter fraud. so
Yeah, getting
so
squatted on. It'll
yeah,
cost you 50,
can,
$100,000. It's a big deal.
can you give any secrets now? Or I mean, can you kind of allude to some things that maybe people will learn in your class? I mean, I'm sure this is something for landlords would be especially interested in this. Somebody who has a lot of property, but is there anything that you can kind of give hints about on what they can do?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So prevention is your number one thing that you want to do. And the best way to prevent it is to make it hard for squatters to occupy your property. It sounds kind of simplistic, but how do you protect your own property? What do? You got a burglar alarm. You're alerted to the presence of anybody who walks into the property. And so, people might think, oh my God, burglar alarms are expensive. It costs thousands to install. No, these days, Simply Safe is an alarm company that I've used, and I don't work for them. I'm not affiliated. But if you use the code if you sign up at squatterdefender.com and order the course, then you get half off of a security
Oh,
system. And that is a portable security system. And all you need is just the camera the base station, and a motion sensor. So if somebody enters in your house, you don't even have to have police monitoring. It's like $25 a month, but so you can afford it. But if you don't want to pay for that, you could just have it, give it a notification on your phone. Hey, William, looks like your motion sensor went off. And so you say, oh, well, that guy's not supposed to be there. There's not supposed to be anybody there at all. Let's see, check my front door camera. Okay, the door's been kicked in. I'm calling the cops immediately. And he has no time to get his friends in, establish any sort of legitimacy. So if you got like a busted door, the cops show up 10 minutes later after he's busted in there, you check your notifications, it's problem solved. You've nipped it in the bud. Whereas if you don't have an alarm system, then the guy's maybe been in there a week, 2 weeks, a month, 6 months. Who knows? He's there. He's rented places to his rooms to his buddies. It's a whole lot harder to get them out at that point. And so that's basically the first one. It's common sense, but I put it in context at the Squatter Defender training series to where you need to understand exactly, how time works against you and how you mitigate your exposure to time, because time is how people establish tenancy. They establish rights, and none of these things should happen. We can all agree on that, but nonetheless, the way the law is written, that's how they do it.
So I'm sure that they take out different or change their address to that address, so they're getting mail to that address, or whatever the case may be. I can only imagine. But what sounds to me is what you're saying is that most squatters are pretty, I guess, in tune, or I don't say educated, but they kind of know what they need to do. Or is it the latter, that most squatters are just looking for a place to stay for overnight or whatever, and they end up being there for a couple weeks, and somebody says, hey bro, you can stay there if you stay there longer. Joe got a house down the street and she'll show you how. Or is it simply that people are just happen to go into homeless home, or I guess empty houses? Where is the biggest percentage? Is it a growing movement now that we're getting more educated squatters, more people that know what they're going into? Are we getting more of those because more people are aware of the laws, or are we getting more of the other ones, like I was saying?
So it's funny you bring this up, because first of all, these people are finding out about how to do this on the internet. Maybe it's, their low life friends just talking to each other around, a dumpster fire or something, but really it's the
Literally
internet.
a dumpster fire.
Yeah, exactly. The literal trash can fire. Yeah. It's really the internet where people are talking, saying like, hey, you can actually do it this way. And people start getting ideas. And then, a little bit of Googling, a little bit of sleuthing. Next thing you know, they've got a full playbook. And that was one thing that people accused me of when I went viral, is they say, hey, you know what you're doing? You're giving a playbook for the squatters. All they got to do is just do what you do. And like, they're going to defraud property owners, and it's going to be your fault. And my response to that is like, there is a grain of truth to that. I will admit that, because I did sort of like outline the playbook. But the thing is about a scam, you can't scam somebody who knows what the scam is anywhere nearly as easy as you can scam people who don't see it coming and don't know what the heck it is. And so my objective is to educate people so they see squatting for what it is, begin to recognize it, know how to protect themselves from it. And if they do have it, then they know what to do about it. And you were asking before about what to do about it, William. The short answer is, so if you take my course at squatterdefender.com, I outline just all of your options, what to do.
I'm running your Title Defender. I'm running your Title Defender website, but people can go to Squatter Defender too also.
That's right. Yeah. Squatterdefender.com. And actually now would be a great time to mention, if you do decide to purchase anything at squatterdefender.com or at titlefrauddefender.com, you can use your special promo code, William, and that would be William W would be the promo code. And that will get you 20% off on all products.
My promo code on other sites is WWFA.
Oh, okay. Well, I could change it to that, but we'll do both of them. WWFA. All right, I'll make both of them work. But yeah, it's I'm sorry, William, what was your question again? I got into plug mode.
No, absolutely. No, you're doing fantastic. I've got the questions as you're talking just keep coming. I just keep thinking of all these other questions. So yes, I would see where you might be giving the playbook away to potential other squatters. However, in my opinion, and I'm not just saying this, what comes to my mind is you may be protecting a lot more people from it happening to than you're actually giving the playbook to who are going to actually use it.
Exactly.
You,
Yeah. And so, that's where I was talking about how giving away the playbook is really just describing what the scam is, how it's perpetrated, and how you can protect yourself from it. And so, things like credit card fraud, like, stealing a catalytic converter, your scams du jour, if you will. All of those things, you can go on the internet and you can find out how to steal a catalytic converter. You can figure out how to steal someone's credit card number and commit credit card fraud. But these are well-known scams, and people have started, because they've become so prevalent and pervasive, they now are taking measures to protect themselves from it. They're sealing off their catalytic converters if they live in a bad neighborhood, and they're taking other measures to protect themselves from getting identity thefted and things like that. And that's the whole idea behind the products that I'm selling, is you can protect yourself for just a little bit of a fee. But if you want to DIY it, then you can absolutely do that too. You can check on your home title every day just by refreshing your county page every day. It's a pain in the neck, and I'll only charge you a few bucks a month to do that for you 24/7 at Title Fraud Defender. But you can DIY it. That's and it just takes a little bit of effort.
So we've got titlefrauddefender.com is what I've been running.
Yeah.
But now I where I live in Louisiana, in Jefferson Parish, we actually have a system set up where they are watching out over titles. So they actually are proactive in that. Of course, it's a Republican minded district and administration, because they don't believe in redistribution of wealth. So
Right.
they have something set up. I won't go into and explaining it, nor would I be able to right now, but they have something
Oh,
set
no,
up
I can
where
explain it for you. That's literally what it is. Like, they sign it's basically, what the county did, what your county did very wisely, I might add, is contract with a company like Title Fraud Defender. And like, there's a couple of them nationwide. And the title fraud company says, all right, if anybody submits from this county, we got you. You don't have to, and they don't have to pay any extra money. So your county did the right thing by buying in bulk, essentially, and getting
nice.
their title monitored across the board. And if you're a county recorder's office, I'd love to talk with you. I'd love to cover an entire county instead of just people individually. But yeah, your county's on top of it. I'm glad to hear it, William.
So let's talk about title fraud for a minute, because the squatters' rights is the hotter issue, but there's also title fraud,
Mm,
which of course I'm going to make another analogy to election fraud, because a lot of people, will say, "Oh, our election machines are not being hacked into. They're super duper triple protected, high security, super duper, respected. Nobody's gonna get into them." However, you know, I heard a news story yesterday. Vegas computers are getting hacked into, hospital, servers get hacked into, your credit cards get stolen all the time. Your bank gets, broken into all the time, whether it's not identity theft there, whether it is ransomware of information. Hospitals the same. I've even heard stories that now they can actually affect patients in their rooms, but with breaking in through security, through firewalls that are all set up. And now you're telling me that, of course, your home could be stolen just digitally by breaking into the computer system, basically. Is that what we're talking about? And how do you protect that?
So it actually takes some ink and paper to steal a title. It can be done electronically, but there's more safeguards actually when you use a electronic notary than there is if you use a personal notary. Because if you go online, you can get electronic notarization for like passing a home title, but you got to show your ID. You got to go through like all these like biometric checks. But if you just meet a notary in person to go sign a property deed, it's like, hey, I'm George. Here's my ID. They'll glance at it, be like, looks like you. And ka-chunk, there goes their notary seal. And and suddenly you're good to go. And that's even if they even bother going to a notary in the first place, because that's the protection measure, is that notary stamp. To get one of those notary stamps, you got to go through one of the stamp companies, and you got to give them your credentials and say, like, yeah, I'm William, I'm a notary, here's my number. And they look it up, be like, okay, this guy checks out, here's your stamp. So it's not like you can just go out and buy one, but we're talking about a rubber stamp here. Like, can it be forged? Absolutely. It's not a driver's license, it's not $100 bill. Like, we're talking about a rubber stamp that puts ink on the paper. Like, it can be forged. A chunk, and that's all you need. And then and I get a lot of pushback, just like you were saying with like election fraud, like, oh hey, like it never happens, like, this is impossible, no one ever does this. And I say, hey, here's 90 articles about this, about people that it's happened to. I've spoken with several lawyers, including like the preeminent deed fraud lawyer in America, and they'll all tell you, like, yeah, this is absolutely real, this is absolutely happening, and people need to know about it, because what it can result in is all of your home equity, all that you worked for your entire life, in your investment property or your home. It can be stolen from you, and you're not insured to get that money back. So it can be stolen by a criminal, and your title insurance policy, it will not cover it in most cases, because the title insurance that you purchased, there's two primary products. There's the Alta owner's policy and the Alta homeowner's policy. Most people just check your closing statement for when you bought your house. It'll probably say Alta owner's policy. And it's a good title policy. It works great for most things, but it covers to the date that you bought the house. Going forward during your ownership, it does not provide coverage, and it doesn't provide coverage for anything. It has to have happened in the past. So that's why I say that's why this is so terrible. Because if somebody, robs your house, steals your car, that's why we got insurance. Or credit card frauds you, the credit card company, like, it's covered. You're going to get it back. In this case, with title fraud, you're not going to get the money back in most cases, because it's not covered by insurance.
So once they steal the house, on paper, they probably borrow against it. They grab the cash, do whatever, spend it, and now they're gone. Does that bank go after the original owner, or if they can't get the criminal? How does that work? So basically, you said a minute ago, you can lose something you've worked your whole life for. So Joe Blow, who's 70 years old, worked his whole life, he paid off his home. His home's worth, $300,000, and somebody, let's say it's a squatter, or maybe not a squatter, whoever it is, they're able to go in and steal and be able to do some sort of a fake bill of sale, I guess you're telling me. I mean, they're able to do that easily, a fake bill of sale.
Yeah, fake fraudulent deed. You don't even need a bill of sale. The recorder's office, they get the deed, and they say, all right, looks like got the notary seal, got a legal description. Yep. All right, we're good to go. Filed. And yeah, and just like you're saying, Joe is going to unfortunately have loans taken out against the house, like you were saying. And guess what? Of course, the title thief is not going to be repaying those loans, or he'll just turn around and sell the property. And you can sell a property without having to list it on Zillow, because you might have friends saying like, oh, hey, William, looks like you listed your house. Are you moving away? Where are you going? They'll call up a wholesaler, and these are the guys that buy properties off market at a discount. And so maybe it's worth $300,000, and you call up a wholesaler and you say like, hey man, I'll sell you this property off market for 210 grand. The wholesaler says, yeah, I got you. And then he'll be able to close on that property usually within a matter of like, a couple weeks, pretty quick. And
so they're able to take a fraudulent deed that's been spent to a notary and take that, and a wholesaler will just say buys it, and they do and the wholesaler, knowingly or unknowingly, because I'm sure the wholesalers now know this is going on, but maybe they don't care because they get a property regardless, and they're
no, they don't know. They just got a phone call from a guy and saying like, oh, hey man, I'll sell you this place for really cheap. And they're like, oh, this is great, because this is what they do every single day, is hopefully get phone calls saying like, yeah, I'll sell you this $300,000 property for $200,000. So the title thief, all he's got to do is just sign the documents to sell the property. So the wholesaler, like, he opens up escrow, he does the whole thing, he checks on the title, makes sure everything's cool, and what title sees is like, oh, looks like this person purchased this property just a few weeks ago, and looks like they bought it for, let's see, 190K. They could just make up a number basically, and now he's selling to you for a little bit of a profit. Looks like we got a property flipper on our hands, because that happens all the time. We buy a
So wait,
property for
so the
200 and
criminal
sell it right
can, so
away.
the criminal the title thief
Mhm.
can literally find a house that's paid for, create a deed, and go have it recorded, and have ownership of the house that's now recorded in their county, or in our case, where I live, a parish,
Mhm.
and now the house belongs to them, and there's nothing stopping this at all whatsoever.
There's nothing stopping this at all whatsoever. The only safeguard that's in place for that transfer is supposedly the notary seal, the stamp, but that's easily circumvented by just, a fake ID or a fake stamp. And
But how
fake
how does the owner, the real owner, not show up to a transaction and it still gets processed?
Oh yeah, you just forge the signature, but there's nothing to compare that signature to. So when you're the court recorder's office, you've got a deed, deeding it out of William's name and into, Scammer McScammerstein's name. They don't know what your signature looks like. They're going to be like, all right, well, it looks like the owner signed it, so we're good to go.
So how does this circumvent anybody checking to see if there's a mortgage on the house, or there's the title's been put up for collateral? How does this get around that happening?
So when you're just filing a deed, you don't even have to go through escrow, because if you go through escrow, they're gonna say like, oh yeah, looks like there is a mechanics lien or a mortgage. Like, yeah, we got to pay off this mortgage. So the scammer of course doesn't have like the money to pay off the mortgage. So he's going to target places that have no mortgage, have no debt, but he's not even going to bring it to escrow to begin with. And so once he gets the property in his name, in the scammer's name, the fake name, he's going to, any new buyer, they're of course going to go through escrow, and escrow is going to say like, okay, we got a loan of like 150 grand, 180 grand. The scammer already knows about this, because you can find out how much debt is on a property, because a lot of times those loans will be like publicly, they're public information. So they're going to target places that don't have any debt, it's mortgage free, or at least they have like a lot of it, or like a lot of equity, that is. Because if you only owe like 40K on your property and it's worth 500 grand, the scammer is going to think like, okay, whatever, I just won't get that 40 grand. Escrow will pay off the loan, and instead of getting 500 grand, I'll get 460 or something like that.
It's this easy as you're making it.
Yeah, no, it's a series of steps that you have to follow in order for it to be successful. So we've talked a little bit about like the grades of criminals. So you got your homeless drug addicts.
Right.
They're just looking for something they can find on the ground. Crimes of opportunity. This one has to be executed in a series of steps in order for it to work. But I'm here to tell all your listeners is people are taking these steps. They've figured it out and they're doing it. There's a guy who finally got arrested, and he'd done it like 50 times. And yeah. And then a big celebrity, the guy in the real estate space, he's the host of the Bigger Pockets podcast. He had 50 of his properties get stolen through deed fraud also. And he's talked about it publicly, but and there's always pushback, just like you're saying with the voter fraud. People say like, "Oh, it's not real. There's too many safeguards. This doesn't happen." And it's like, yo, I've looked into this. I've studied it. I promise you. Like the world's not flat. This actually exists.
So at Fraud Defender, at Title Fraud Defender, your website, you show people how to protect their titles also.
So that's the thing. You can't really protect your title beyond that which you get from Title Fraud Defender, because you can't lock it. There's another one of our competitors, a home title lock. It's a bit misleading because they're not locking your title. That's impossible to do. What we do at Title Fraud Defender is just like what your county does, is if anything happens to your title, they will alert you. We will alert you at Title Fraud Defender that your title has been passed. And why that's important is because that makes it so the scammer doesn't have time to take out loans or sell the property right away, because this takes like a minimum of like a couple weeks after title transfers to him for them to actually, cash it out. But you can put a stop to that, so you still have to go through a action to quiet title to get the title restored. But what doesn't happen is you don't lose all of your equity, and that's what's really at stake, isn't it? Is your money. You don't want to lose your money. And I think there's $33 trillion in home equity wealth in the United States. That's a lot of wealth. That's a lot of money
Right.
to go after. So
I
a
mean,
title fraud
everybody
defender, and
talks about
yeah.
how the Democrats want to transfer wealth and how the liberal-minded people want to use socialism to transfer wealth. But you're saying that between squatting and title fraud, that there's enough legitimate-minded people, not that it's a legitimate action, but people that have brains that are able to find ways to transfer wealth while everybody else is arguing about it on a political level. These people have it all figured out on a level that it's just business for them. They
Oh,
figured out
yeah.
how to transfer their own wealth illegally as it may be, but they're getting away with it because everybody else on the political side isn't doing anything about it because they're trying to, whatever reason they're not focusing on it.
Yeah, they're too busy arguing, and meanwhile, the criminals are doing what they do best, which is figuring out a way to extract money from a victim and put it into their bank account or their, you know, dresser drawer, or their tent on the corner. And so,
On a political level, do you is this next election coming up? We have a presidential election coming up. I know that you're pretty as you pointed out to me earlier, you're really politically homeless.
yeah,
Not that
exactly.
you're not politically astute, not that you're not smart politically, because you've shared with me off camera that you try to stay kind of unbiased in a way, and rightfully so, because your issue doesn't affect it affects Democrats and Republicans equally. However, in this next presidential election, do you think that there's any one candidate that might be more in tune with how to protect our freedoms and our liberties, our wealth when it comes to these subject matters?
Oh, well, I mean, that's an easy one, William. I mean, it's Donald Trump by a country mile. And if you want to preserve your freedoms with regards to property ownership and keeping and crime and punishment, then chances are you're going to want to vote Republican. And that's just because all of the legislation that's really ever existed with regards to like squatting and fraud, it's initiated by the Republicans. And so I'm not telling you which way to vote, but insofar as this in the spectrum of what I'm speaking about today, and how it concerns our freedoms, our individual liberties, then yeah, the candidate that most aligns with what I'm talking today is Donald Trump by a lot.
So what do you think that he would need to do to expand his base in this political spectrum that we're in right now? The next few months are going to be just story after story after story. On a positive note, do you think that there's anything that Trump can do to expand his base, particularly when it comes to title fraud and squatters' rights?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of property owners and there's a lot of real estate investors that are not Republican and they are not conservative. However, they are willing to vote for a candidate or a cause that is going to protect their portfolio and their money. And so maybe there, we've talked about like single issue voters out there. There are single issue real estate investor voters everywhere, and they're not just Republicans. There's a lot of Democrats out there. And if you've got one candidate saying like, yeah, property ownership, we should really just return it to the government. And you've got a Democratic real estate investor saying who with a $5 million real estate portfolio, who's going to think to himself, to heck with that. I've worked my entire life for this. I mean, I'm not going to vote for that person. And so you talk about expanding your base. If he makes any mention of property rights and preservation of, what keeps these properties in our own bank accounts, in our own portfolios, versus redistributing that wealth that we as investors have worked so hard for, then yeah, I think that would expand the base, because there's a lot of property owners that don't always vote Republican. But if you start if you start threatening them and their money and their wallets, their pocketbooks, their families, then yeah, they'll jump ship real quick.
I love it. George, man, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this time. You've given out a lot of really good information and a lot of heads up to a lot of people on how easy it is to get a squatter on your property and cost you a lot of money. And I love the fact that you have a solution. We've kind of talked about the websites a little bit, on that, but I want to give you final word. Is there any final things that you'd like to say before we exit?
So I guess the final thing I'd like to say is I'd love to hear from you. If you're faced with a title fraud or squatter issue, you can book a consultation at squatterdefender.com, and I'd love to hear from you. You can also find me on social media at MRD_Portland on Instagram, and that same title at TikTok as well. And then I'm on X at McCleary RE. But if I'm really easy to find, if you Google George McCleary, then you can find me. Send me a friend request, send me a message. I'd be happy to hear from you and talk about squatting, talk about real estate. I'll even talk about politics. Just for my involvement in this whole initiative, I've gone and talked about politics quite a bit. And you said before, William, that I was politically homeless. That's exactly what I am. I'm neither Republican nor Democrat. I see both sides of all issues as best I can, the best of my ability. But to say that I'm on the side with the conservatives on this one would be a fair statement. And so but you don't even need to agree with me. That's the beauty of this country, is we can all disagree. And so if you think squatters are great, you think we should, round them up and shoot them all, I want to hear from you. So contact me on social and let's have a conversation.
That's amazing, George. I can't thank you enough. Like you said, it's. I think more people need to know about this, and I appreciate your time, and I appreciate my listeners' time. Giving us their attention on this matter. But I'd be even more grateful if you'd share the show. Means a lot to me to not only share the show and share the information, but I'm always looking for ways to protect freedom and liberty and prosperity in America. And I think that this is one of those, just a little small issue that helps solve that or put the whole puzzle together when it comes to freedom in America. So I'd be more grateful if you would share it with somebody that might need to know about how to protect themselves from squatters, but even more so, how to protect freedom in America. Thank you
Oh,
so
great.
much. And y'all have a great day. Thank you, George. Appreciate you.
Thanks, William. It was a great time.